So we're back here with part two of our wonderful discussion with singer-songwriter extraordinaire, guitarist, something that we didn't even really touch on much, but wonderful Steve Gillette, originally from LA and now living here in the foothills of the Green Mountains of Vermont with his beautiful wife Cindy Manxon and wonderful singer-songwriter that she is. So we're going to get right back into it. This is part two of my interview with Mr. Steve Gillette. When you signed with them, was it for a multiple record deal or just one record?
Yeah, no, they had options for 7 albums. Yeah, 7 years,
including the first album.
Yeah. There's a lot to the story, and there might be 3 or 4 things in my life that I really regret. I really wish I had the maturity, the judgment, just should have asked somebody.
Yeah.
Milt Olkin was very, very generous about advising and supporting me, and he became my publisher, Cherry Lane Music, and they published Back on the Street Again, which was the first chart song that I wrote. And actually, he suggested to me that the song needed a bridge, and that's the first bridge I ever wrote. He was a mentor, but at the same time, my relationship with Vanguard was not really a very primary relationship. I didn't really have anybody, I didn't have a manager, I didn't have a real agent, and I was just sort of, disconnected with Vanguard. Maynard Solomon is a tremendous guy and very, very highly respected, a really great record man, and a very, a real lefty, a real great, committed, they did, Vanguard produced the Weavers at Carnegie Hall when
Right.
the Weavers were blacklisted, and no label, nobody would touch them.
Right.
But Vanguard really stuck their necks out. And it was a huge success, sold out, and a big album, and still is so highly thought of. But I didn't know anything about all that. I was just frustrated, disappointed, whatever. I just didn't know why more wasn't happening,
How did you end up, the first things I knew about you when we met in the mid-'80s was that you were writing for Disney, and you were writing for the Disney cartoon characters and living a pretty good life in LA, in the Hollywood Hills, and that whole scene going on. And this would have been, I suppose, in the 70s.
Yeah.
And so this was the height of the California songwriter scene of the Eagles and Jackson Browne, and Linda Ronstadt had kicked it into high gear, and
Laurel Canyon
and Malibu and the whole thing.
Yeah.
Where were you during that time, and how did you fit into that, and who? And I'm not asking for necessarily name dropping, but it is a part of your life that
Sure.
you have associated with these people, and so nobody thinks less of you for mentioning these names.
After my, I sort of left Vanguard. I didn't want to make another album, and that was if I could.
You only made one?
Just made the one.
Okay.
They did pick up the option, and I said no, and they said, "Well, you have to. We have an option," and I said, "Well, sue me." I mean, it was that stupid.
Right.
Just that arrogant. But I was in love, and I was very full of myself. I don't know why. I mean, I hadn't had the validation of my own hit records as an artist or anything. I just was. I don't know. I was just on a trip. Immature. I admit it. I take full responsibility.
And what did Vanguard do?
Well, they did eventually give me a release, but it was a release that still had the 7 options, and I signed it anyway. I didn't realize, well, I should have realized, I should have known enough. As a lawyer's kid, I should have realized that no record company would take a chance of signing me while Vanguard still had the options. So I sort of,
Shot yourself in the foot.
My career there by myself, and it's all my doing. But I was really, I was on the road, I was playing, I was traveling, I was getting a lot of validation on that level, on the coffee house level.
Yeah.
And to me, that was a pretty magical time. As a matter of fact, when I did get so engrossed in the music industry in Los Angeles, up until about 82 or 3 or 4, and then there was a real burnout because I realized I had lost the thing that I really loved to do, which was to play in front of people and in a folk audience, not in bars. I mean, I was playing in bars to make house payments.
Right.
That was actually a very excellent strategy in terms of the real estate market in Los Angeles in 1975, 6, 7, because houses were doubling. You know, so every time I made a $900 house payment, I was making $1,800 in the bank, except that there was this whole other thing having to do with, you know, the folk circuit, the folk life, you know, the traveling and playing and being a part of something, the communication, the consciousness level was gone. I mean, I was in the industry, and that was the more of the Disney model. But I started to be able to work with, I had some very good things come my way. One of them was Graham Nash, and I feel comfortable dropping his name because he's a prince, you know, an absolute, genuinely wonderful, nice guy. And he spent a lot of his own money to make an album for me, which I'm very proud of, but if there were compromises, it was in the direction of something that would attract a record label.
Now, the album that he recorded with you, produced for you, which one is that?
It's called A Little Warmth.
Okay.
And that's based on a song that my friend Mac Holbert and Les Boheme wrote about the Alaska pipeline, because that was we thought that was a key to a great country hit.
Right.
The whole project was pretty much compromised because we were in Los Angeles trying to produce a country record. But we had some wonderful players. We had some of the people from Bonnie Raitt's band, Stan Celeste, playing piano, was a monster piano player. We had Johnny Barbada and Pete Sears from the Starship, bass and drums. We had, anyway, Willie Nelson's bass player, you know, we had David Lindley played wonderful slide guitar.
Oh, man.
It's a terrific album, but it was so locked into that moment of what could attract a record label that when it was rejected by those record labels that we were pursuing, it was frustrating, and it ended up coming out on a very small label that called Regency.
Even with Graham's name attached to it. And he was, in the 70s, he was a big deal.
Absolutely. Well, one of the problems was that the Crosby, Stills and Nash reunited after they kind of had a breakup in the early 70s. Then they got the chance to make, I think the album's called Allies, and they made a great album. But what it meant was everything kind of cooled off in terms of the excitement.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah. With that going on, how did you end up at writing for Jiminy Cricket?
Well, you know, my friend Tom Campbell, who wrote Darcy Farrow with me way back in 1964, had been working at Disneyland. That's when I met him, because
Working at Disneyland as a...
Well, he was part of the management program, the junior management trainee kind of program. He started out as a ride operator, putting people on one of the, you know, rides that they... And he was just a college kid that wanted to work basically in the summertime, but he was offered this management trainee position. And so he kind of became a corporate guy, very close-cropped, red hair, and very efficient, you know, tight ship. And so I auditioned for him with a trio that I had with Linda Albertano, who wrote a lot of songs, 210 Train, of course.
Right.
And my friend Mike McChrystal and my friend Bob Longpre. So we went to audition for Disneyland for the, actually Tom created the Monday Night Hootenannies. For him to tell the story is very funny, but he went to the executives at Disneyland. He says, "You've got this huge theme park, and there's nothing happening on Monday night, and you've got 6,000 people milling around in this square in Tomorrowland, you know." They said, okay, take the Tomorrowland stage, put together a music concert Monday nights, and he called it the Monday Night Hootenanny. And Doug Weston at the Troubadour hated that idea because his Monday Night Hootenanny was the place. That was where all the, that's where you saw all the, Christopherson,
Right.
I remember Michelle Phillips pulling Chris Christopherson up onto the stage. He was very, very, very drunk. And she was saying, "You've got to hear this guy, you've got to hear this guy." And finally he managed to stagger onto the stage and sang Bobby McGee. And we all said, "Yeah, okay." So that was the Troubadour Monday nights. So Doug Weston said, "I'll put him out of business." Talking about Tom Campbell and his, "I got a $40 million theme park. How's Doug Weston going to put me out of business?"
And of course, where Disneyland is in relation to the Troubadour is it's not like you can do both.
It might be 35 miles. but
Yeah,
it's-
you're not going to do both on the same night.
No, but also the Troubadour.
It's not like in
Monday-
Greenwich Village where you have Folk City and the Speakeasy and the
And the
Kettle of
Bitter End,
Fish and
yeah.
Bitter End, and where you can literally do all of them in one night.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, you had to make a decision whether to do the Troubadour or Tom Campbell's
Yeah.
Disney World.
Well, and of course you got paid for playing on the Tomorrowland stage, and it was good pay. It was, that's the thing about the corporate world as opposed to the nightclub world.
Right.
Doug Weston always claimed he was living off the proceeds of his cigarette machine. I mean, he would swear to us he couldn't pay because he was, anyway. I hate to trash everybody. It's kind of fun actually, but so Tom had created this wonderful thing for the summertime. And Josh White, I sat in the dressing room with Josh White behind the Tomorrowland stage, and while he was changing strings, and he was wonderful, friendly, and he's a giant, Josh White, Eleanor Roosevelt had him in the White House, he
Right.
was, and the backstage, the green room, was actually an exhibit at Disneyland from one of their movies, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, and it was Captain Nemo's submarine with the huge dome window and a giant squid, a 30-foot long tentacle reaching around, and we're sitting there on this little bench, changing strings and talking behind this. That was 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. I'll never forget that. But Judy Henske, so many, and always a great gospel group, and always a great band. Big, good time show. So Tom was very helpful to me.
So you started then writing for Disney?
Well, Tom, as a kind of a member of the Disney Corporation, sought out these opportunities for music, and there was a fellow named Jimmy Johnson, a wonderful man, who was at that time the music director for Disney. And of course, we weren't in the Mary Poppins thing or anything, or Dumbo, like people say, you wrote for, but they were doing these little television series. Actually, that came later. The first things we did were like children's albums. Tom had a concept for one, a story album, which we wrote some songs for.
Now, you don't get writer's credit for that.
Well, no, they're very professional about it. They own the publishing, of course, but they pay.
But your name, I'm not going to find your name on a Disney children's album.
Well, the one I'm thinking of, you might. It was a Jiminy Cricket. Jiminy Cricket was the voice telling a story, and he was giving words of wisdom. One of the songs I remember was "Just What You Ought to Do," and Tom and I wrote that. So we had about 3 or 4 songs on that story album. So it might be there in the record, BMI, or it wouldn't probably be ASCAP at this point. But the thing about Tom had this great energy and great vision, but he also really wanted to be a hippie. I mean, he just really hated the corporate thing, and he just
With his
wanted
crew
to
cut hair.
bust out. Well, he eventually. Today he has a silver braid all the way down. It's a lot like your.
So now we're into the 80s.
Yeah.
You're living a pretty good life in the Hollywood Hills, associating with Graham and all the other
Yeah.
singer-songwriters in the LA scene.
Yeah.
Doing these open mic things, writing some songs for Disney's
Yeah.
projects, and then how did you come to hit the road, and then we met?
There is one moment, one really pivotal thing, and that was my friend Charles John Quarto and I had written quite a few songs together, And Charles always talked about the Kerbal Folk Festival. And I said, fine, you know, I'd love to. Are they going to invite me? What's the story? He said, put a tape together for Rod Kennedy at the Kerbal Festival. So I put together a cassette of about 5 of our songs. One of them was Bed of Roses. And at the beginning of the cassette, I just said, hi, Rod. Steve Gillette, you know, Charles has told me all about the festival. I'd sure love to come sometime. You know, I hope you enjoyed these songs. Kind of an audition, really. Well, Rod told me later that he would play this cassette in his car for beautiful young women that he would meet. I mean, that's maybe an oversimplification, but he, you know, they were well produced in studio. You know, I mean, it sounded like a country artist. He didn't know if he should think of me as another, you know, major label artist or anything. But it just, he was flattered that I opened with his name. You know, and we turned out to be very good friends over the years.
Right.
But going to the Kerbal Festival was an eye-opening, and it turned my.
So you just rented a car and drove there, and
I flew there the first time, and I stayed for the weekend, and I stayed in the Holiday Inn, actually along with Steve Young. He was on the bill then. The Happy and Artie Traum were on the bill. Gamble Rogers. As a matter of fact, after the first session of the songwriting school, which I also got to be a part of, Gamble and Happy and Artie and Steve Young and I jumped into Happy and Artie's rental car, and we drove up Highway 16 back to the Holiday Inn. And we had been talking the whole time, Gamble and Steve Young and I especially, were talking about all that we've been reading and studying since, you know, since our folk days of the 60s, you know, and we had talked a lot about Buddhism and meditation and all this stuff. And we're running up Highway 16, and Happy's driving the car, and I said, this is my dream, to be on a 2-lane Texas highway with a bunch of hippies, a bunch of Buddhists, I said, and Happy his neck swirled. I'm like, don't say that, you know. I guess in Texas at that time that would have been a little, you know, you'd be in line for a whooping.
you're going to get us killed.
That's right, yeah. But it was that kind of a thing. It was like we'd found each other again, you know. I had known Gamble. Gamble was one of my closest friends when I lived in the village in 68 and 6, 7, and 8. I lived on Sullivan Street, this tiny little place. And Ron McKinnon and Gamble and Mark Roth, the photographer, you might know him, he did a lot for Joni Mitchell and stuff. They were my closest friends, you know. They were, and David Wilkes. He actually lived across the hall from me. He found that apartment for me, and it was a great apartment. So I realized that there was something missing in my life, and it was the life, the folk circuit, the consciousness, the lack of duplicity. You know what I'm trying to get at? You know, the music industry required you to calculate and to use a kind of a emotional windage, you know, and to always pretend to be something that you couldn't quite, you know, sleep, you know, take to bed. You know, you couldn't be your real, or didn't have the sense that who you really were could count.
You were married and living in LA?
Yes, my first wife Dana and I lived in the Hollywood Hills.
She was a comedian.
Yeah. She and her friend Mandy McBurney had a comedy duo, and they were, I thought, very funny, and they were both very pulchritudinous, you know, and so that counts for a lot at the Comedy Store. They did. They had some wild times, you know, we had a good life. But she was very attached to our Hollywood Hills life,
Right.
And I certainly gloried in the idea of, you know, living that life. It's just that
Something else was now tugging at you.
well, and also there was always a kind of a dread of being able to keep all that financial thing going, basically singing in bars, you know, and so there was a sense of compromise or of time slipping away, midlife maybe, you know.
Right.
So when I got to Kerbal, and I realized, here was Bill Staines and Chuck Pyle and people that were now on the coffeehouse circuit and doing just fine. Now I never heard about them in Los Angeles because everything is variety. This week's Billboard, or it just doesn't exist at all. It's binary. I mean,
Right.
So yeah, that was a revelation, and sadly too, it confronted me with, leaving my home. And that was.
So you bought a van and hit the road? I mean, literally?
Pretty much, yeah, exactly. Well, the first thing was to move out of my house because I realized that, that was the separation that had to take place before anything else could be started as far as building anything else, and that's a hard, very hard thing. And again, that it was years of issues and maybe unacknowledged issues. There's a lot there. Probably I need to really treat it with the number of pages and the amount of respect, really, because I don't want it to seem casual.
The theme of where I'm going with this show
Yeah.
is understanding why artists, how artists adapt to the changes of the music industry. The essence of being signed to a label and now you got credibility and now you could play the circuits, to the ultimate, what I'll call the collapse of our music industry, the folk, Americana, roots music world.
Yeah.
In terms of you now, you jumped in a van and you've hit the road. We met and we worked together for a brief time, and
That was excellent time. Yeah.
and then it became adapting to not being on a label, but being your own record label essentially, and being your own record distributor.
Yeah.
To today, where we are today, and I'm curious, in a nutshell, in wrapping this up, of how you adapted to each step along the way.
Well, you're right. You do kind of have to reinvent yourself depending on the possibilities of each era or each iteration or whatever it is. Getting to Kerbal put me in touch with a network of places. As a matter of fact, one of the first things that I did when I was there was that Chuck Pyle and I and a couple other people contributed all our gig lists to each other. We put them all together, and I had this funny old computer, a little CPM computer that my dad had bought, and so we typed in all the gigs that we all knew about, and we printed it up at the local printer, and eventually the festival offered it for sale for $25. But that put us in the position of having to maintain it, which was a real headache, and we kind of left it with the festival staff, and they were kind of overwhelmed by having to keep it up to date. But that was the first real attempt to make...
What was it called?
The Kerbal Directory.
I remember that.
Yeah, I think I have a copy somewhere. Eventually we gave it to the Folk Alliance, and they offered it as 2 digital discs of venues and also music resources publishers, labels, radio, folk radio, yeah. So they were in a much better position to maintain it. So with that, I really started hitting the road. But being introduced to you, it was Steve Stapenhorst, wasn't it, that introduced me to you in New York.
New York City.
On 6th Avenue, we were in a little pizza place. And the idea of having someone who was a professional in the industry, as you are and were, I wasn't going to say as you were.
Before I got unprofessional.
But what a step up that was, and it really was. I mean, you had me going into a lot of really great venues that I had probably tried and called, but representing yourself is really a painful, humiliating, thing. So that was a big step up, and not to mention Europe. I mean, you sent me over there to work with Hans Jorg and work with Paul Rolstedt, and you know, that was.
There were some good trips there.
Oh yeah. Well, you came along on a lot of them, which you know, it was great. It was great, and you took pictures, and so I have all these wonderful pictures. And then Cindy and I were able to go back to a lot of those places too, and have those adventures.
Now you mentioned Cindy Mangson,
Yes.
your lovely wife. You guys met in I think in '88 or thereabouts.
September of '88, yes.
And really became what I'll call real, and it wasn't well. It's always parting is always sweet sorrow,
Yeah.
but it really was enlightening to me to really, now you took it to the next step, which was to really DIY it, do it yourself, where you're only dependent with the resources you have on the two of you,
Yeah.
and really make a career, which has been a wonderful career over the past 30 years. I know now you are, I'll say, semi-retired in the sense of not hitting the road in the van, or you stepped up a notch after when
We're
Cindy
not
came
on this
in.
level of ostentation, for God's sake. Although we did have a
You had an RV. You had a 27-foot RV. You just didn't name it Harvey. That's all.
That's what
But you took it to
together,
another level of bringing it to really taking it in house, from being someone who was on a label in L.A. and writing for Disney, and working with superstars like Graham Nash, to really putting it all in your own kitchen, literally.
Well, you know, I think for the first half, you're always looking for that magic man. There was always somebody ready to, several artists that I've known just never were without a strong, and actually women artists almost all seem to have some guy, not necessarily a husband. I know Anne Murray talked about how lucky she was to have her manager of 35 or 40 years. I remember when he died, I couldn't tell you his name, but what a relationship that was, how professional, and the chemistry, the sharing of the responsibilities. For Cindy and me, it was the two of us providing for each other and ourselves, but always up to then it was like looking for the magic man, the promoter or the manager or the agent, and in some ways you provided that, and that would have worked and gone on working, but it was as if we were able to move to the next step. I don't mean to hint that there's a way to evolve beyond the Wolke, Pleistocene, whatever it is, but it's that we were able to move to the step of true, what do I mean to say, authentic self-actualization, really, but in a dual way. I mean,
It's funny to say that you're doing it yourself when it's really you and your partner in life who you have melded with on a obviously deeply personal level, but can work that. And it's not that not everyone can do it. It really is a special thing. You talk to people in different professions, and you go, wait, I'm going to be with my partner 24 hours a day? And you guys have found a way to make your niche, carving out your individual time, but also putting the teamwork, I guess would be the right word, into action.
Well, and I think the primary thing was that we really, being together was great, just being together as people, and then the fact that we had musical talent on both sides and could find ways to interweave those talents. But I have to credit Cindy. She's a much more skilled musician, a much more trained musician.
Well, and not to diminish, I mean, we haven't touched on her, but people can certainly look her up and her career through the websites that we mentioned. But, it's not like Cindy was some slouch. She had her own career that, if you will, put aside for the benefit of your partnership.
Yeah.
Of the two of you
taking solid individual careers and making an even more solid
Yeah.
partnership of it's not just Steve Gillette or it's not just Cindy Manxon, it's Steve and Cindy.
I wish you'd explain that. No,
Or is it
it's-
Cindy and Steve?
Well, alphabetical. You know, it's so true. And in any relationship, there are all of these entities that may be, you know, partly chemical or hormonal, but certainly there are a lot of personality issues. And in terms of musicality, the adaptability, you know, and so Cindy's allowed me to kind of be the same guy all the time. And if anything, I'm kind of like the guy with one foot in the music industry or, you know, Nashville or whatever. Her real bliss is in the traditional, especially like the old English ballads and so forth, the Martin Carthy and she's been very creative in that way, but also she's become a songwriter as well, partly because of all the songwriting worlds that we're in too. So we're able to inhabit all those different scenes. But I think that for a lot of couples, it's very difficult because there is stress, and often there'll be one who gets a little more interest or more. Many times it's the woman who is seen as the attractive, marketable, when they do get that break with the corporations.
Right.
With Cindy and me, there's not much danger of Warner Brothers calling us up and saying, "My God, we need you guys," you know. We'll shut down production until you come and be with us. So really, we were kind of confronted with the idea of, you know, carrying it on ourselves. But traveling on the folk circuit with the small presenters who would give us a nice venue, good sound, and maybe 100 people, but usually less, 60, 70 people. 10, 12 may buy a CD. It wasn't very long when we first got together that we drove away with our first $700 night, and then $1,000 night, and then 3 of those on a weekend, you know. So we realized there was buoyancy, and that was the first thing we needed to know, that we could survive.
Right.
And so, you know, we bought this little house in 1994, I guess, and Cindy was always paying an extra 100 or 2 on the mortgage, which meant that we paid it down in about half the time. So there again, you know, I mean, all the things that you're told would be a good idea to do when you start out, you know, get out of debt, you know.
What do you, if you had one thing to tell a young singer-songwriter today who has these insurmountable, it seems to me, career obstacles in front of you, you know, it was one thing that when you were starting into the folk realm in the mid-'80s, that there was, you know, numbers and numbers, you know, hundreds of folk DJs.
Yeah.
And
college.
there were record labels, Rounder and Red House and other labels that catered to artists like yourself, like other singer-songwriters like Greg Brown or John Gorka or Lucy Kaplansky, or these people that became, even though they started later than you, contemporaries of yours, and were on this sort of plane that was, for lack of a better word, below the Judy Collinses and the Arlo Guthries,
Right.
but
Right.
nonetheless just as talented, and those artists up there on that level, Judy and Arlo, were always the first ones to want to assist young songwriters. Joan Baez helping Dar Williams comes to my mind.
Oh, sure.
Now, when there is not this network, what would you say to a 20-year-old Bob Dylan?
Well, a lot of people really are looking for some kind of stardom, and I don't blame them. I mean, I was intoxicated with that. I had to have, you know, the trappings, even though I was stretching the budget to buy an XKE that I couldn't really justify, you know, that kind of thing. That's fine if that's what you want. You want to be a star, and so many of them admitted it very blatantly. They just wanted to be Elvis, you know. But as you mature, I like to think that it's a progressive thing. There is another aspect of that that has to do with, well, it's Yeats. I love this quote, and I use it in my songwriting book about, you know, when I'm young, the tree just flowers and blossoms and all these dreams, all these ideas, but in age I will wither into truth. You know, you picture this gnarled, you know, twisted tree, and there's something that you're still striving for, that you felt like you were able to bring it to the table or to the stage, you know, truth, wisdom, vision. I can say it, you know, I can say it better than anybody. It takes a while before you really do get those kind of chops. And,
Right.
and also, it's not just having the skill, but it's having the duende, you know, the honesty, the authenticity.
Well, I think it also takes a certain amount of fortitude and tenacity to stick with it,
Yeah.
because of these hurdles that are no longer. And now there was this dream that social media would take up some slack, and I'm not sure that it has fulfilled its promise.
No, there is something there, and we do, you know, of course, Facebook, we do. I post my articles on Facebook
Yeah,
every week.
yeah.
But it's true, you do have to kind of seek out and possibly even create. And in a way, I think there's almost a tragic thing about Facebook and the social media, is that it kind of creates these little backyard stages in every home where you're the star. You know, there's a sadness to that. I think you just have to utilize it. And you know, if you're willing to travel, you can. If we wanted to sell CDs, we really would have to go out and sell them. You have to beat the drum. But you don't necessarily have to do that to create work that you feel is worthy of what you're capable of.
Do you feel like you have more songs in you that you still want to share the stories of?
Absolutely. And you know, talk about that old impulse to want to be Elvis. I think there's a great American standard that I'm just the guy to write, you know, but I'm trying to think of what that one is. But in the folk days, it was more about stories and you know, cowboys and truckers, and you know, and Nashville has always been the place where even if Los Angeles had gone into Milli Vanilli land, Nashville still wanted stories, or still could. There was still interest in good songs with stories. So there's always a place, but if it has to be justified in terms of, you know, income or sales, then that introduces that, you know, that static that doesn't quite let the real vibration come through. But everybody now with a laptop and a microphone, you know,
My trusty microphone.
a plug-in mic, you can create a beautiful, you know, something that's, you know, that you want to share and that's valid and worthy. And that may be, I'm always talking about birdsong, you know. What if you really could just come from that place, not be attached to being well thought of, you know? That would be a big, hard thing for me, but that's I think that's the best place to come from in terms of writing.
Right.
That joyful thing.
Well, I really appreciate all your time, Steve.
It's great fun.
These stories are never ceased to unopen new avenues, and I could sit here and talk with you for hours because you really have a wealth of wisdom to share with people, and your career is really. The reason I wanted to interview you first is because you are the epitome of what I'm looking for in this, whatever you want to call it, program that I'm trying to create here, of how you can adapt from the big time, whatever that may be.
Close brush with the big
to,
time, yeah.
to shooting yourself in the foot,
Yeah.
to forging ahead and still literally only depending on your voice, your guitar, and your writing to earn a living. And more important than that, to make an impact on the world.
Well, it's amazing that we can, you can, and anyone can. It's amazing that we can do that. I almost want to burst into some patriotic thing and say, but in this wonderful land, I do think there's a danger that something is closing in on us all in terms of being guided, being controlled, maybe even being limited in our possibilities. But I worry about it more in terms of consciousness than I do in terms of the quality of our life. I don't need the luxury. I don't even mind working in a genuine salt mine if that keeps body and soul together, as long as that other thing, that other Orwellian thing, is kind of not allowed to shut down the real process. So as I say, it may be that that's the liberation that we have now by choosing to live simply and letting the priority be the quality of work and thought, the authentic. I sound like I'm trying to spout Alan Watts, but you know what I mean. There's something there to be sought after.
Well, I want to thank you again. Thank you so much, Steve.
Well, you're on your way. You're on your odyssey, and you'll find that
we're going on an adventure.
The meaning of life, absolutely. Yeah. Well, congratulations. I mean, you really, I don't have a champagne bottle to smash, but
We're going to get there.
yeah. Well, good luck.